Hello everyone. Welcome to the stream. Hi everyone. I hope you all are enjoying this Global Hack Week. We are inching towards the end of the session, but I am pretty sure that we have some pretty cool mini events as well as some other technical session lined up as well. Today, in this particular session, we will be exploring about authentication, authorization, and particularly about OAuth. And we will understand what it is, how we can use them in our applications. We'll also see some really cool examples, so that will help you understand how we can use them in a practical use case scenario. So that is all that we will do today. In the meantime, I would love to know like where you are joining from and if this global hack week is being fun for you all. I'm pretty sure like you have attended other sessions as well. In that case, you can tell me which one did you like the most. By the way, I attended some cool other mini events as well and some sessions, and they were really fun. So I was also watching other streams with you all. Mhm. Let's wait for a minute or two to just let some other folks join in, and then we'll get started in no time. In the meantime, I guess I can add my screen to the stream so you all can see what's up for you all. Awesome. Cool. By the way, it's really hot out here in my city, Kathmandu, and and really I'm trying to cooperate with this stream because like it's really hot out here and the fans are not working. So yeah, I'm trying my best over here. Awesome. Welcome everyone to the stream. I guess we can get started now. So hi everyone, welcome once again to the stream. And today we will be learning about securing your apps with OAuth. And if you have not heard about OAuth before, don't worry because this will be a beginner-friendly approach to the session, and I will explain everything in detail. Uh, Hi Rasmi, welcome to the stream. I am excited as well. Uh, she's a regular comer in our stream, so thank you for being such a regular attendee. And I hope that you have checked into the event because make sure that you do that before we get started because that will help you on the point. So let me just quickly share my screen. So if you have not checked in already, make sure that you go to the event OSQ, which I will also post in the comments. So here we go. So this is the check-in link. So make sure that you have logged in and registered to this event. Yeah. So once you're checked in, then you will be able to earn the points for the session that will help you win some swags as well. Cool. So check-in is done. Let's get back to our slide. And before getting started, let me introduce myself with you all. So hi everyone, I am Sagar and I am the MLS coach from Nepal. I'm also the founder of KU Hackfest, which is like a national hackathon out here in Nepal that we do on a regular basis. I'm also a GitHub campus expert and I love everything about pizzas. I like to travel in nature, so that's my go-to activity in the weekends and free time. So after the stream, I have a short trip planned up as well. So I'll be going over there, and I'm absolutely love cloud and DevOps side of things. So yeah, so that is about myself. If you want to connect with me, I am available on Twitter at SagarUpreti9 and on LinkedIn at Sagar-Upreti. So enough about me. Now let's talk about what we will be doing today. So we will be uh, covering this specific agenda. So firstly, we will talk about authentications, and then we'll understand about authorization. We'll also try to see what are the differences between them and try to identify uh, the meaning of each of them and in what context should we use them. Then, as I said, we will talk about OAuth 2.0. We will also talk about the authorization flow, which is a process that happens when we use OAuth, and that will basically explain how the entire OAuth things work and how we get secure access to different app platforms. So we'll talk about that flow, and then we have two demos lined up for today. So first, we will have the Spotify Auth demo. So what we will do is that we will use an API tool such as Postman to connect to Spotify with the help of API. And then we will see how we can authorize Postman to access our Spotify account. And with the help of that, once we get access to Spotify, we can do different things. in Spotify, like searching for songs or tracks or finding your best artists. So we'll try to see how we can do that. And finally, we will have one more round of demo. So that will be for the GitHub OAuth. So that we will see that with a sample Node.js application. So we will have a Node.js application, and we will see how we can incorporate GitHub authentication to let our users sign into our application from the help of GitHub account. And once you do this, you will be able to understand the different use cases of this, and you can add authentication such as Google sign in, Facebook sign in, and other things as well. So these are the agendas. So starting with authentication. Mm, so can anyone of you in the audience let me know what do you think is the difference between authentication and authorization? Because that will make this more fun. I'm just waiting for the comments and see if anyone has already got the clue about it. Okay, let me wait for the answers over here. Awesome. So yeah, I will break the ice over here and tell you the answer. So authentication is making sure that the person who is requesting access to any of the resource, or if they are trying to access certain system or software or even your application, so authentication is what confirms that they are actually the person who they are trying to say. So let's say, for example, a user named uh, John is trying to access my application. So I have built an application, and a user named John at gmail.com is trying to access my application. So authentication is how I will verify that it's actually John who is trying to access my application. So things like that comes into aspect. When we talk about authentication, it's mostly on the identification side of thing, and making sure that the person who is trying to make a request is the one they are trying to say. For an example, uh, let's say we are trying to get into the university premises. So the ID card, so the security guard might ask you for a identity card, right? For a valid student ID. So that student ID will prove that you are actually a student of that university, and since it will have your names and photo details, so that will confirm your identity, and that is what authentication is. Yep, Rasmi, you are right. I am just coming into that, and now that was about authentication. Now, and about authorizations, it is about making sure that they have the necessary rights and privilege that they want. So authentication helped you to identify the person um, or the one who is making the request, while authorization is all about telling what permissions or what access do they have with that identity. So let's, for example, I am verified as a student at my university, but I will not have access to go into the exam controller room, right? So that is about authorization, because it defines the permissions and privileges that I will have in my application. So for example, I might have access to go to library, I might have access to get some books and return them, but I will not have access to go into exam rooms and see my scorecards and everything, right? So that is about permission. So what can I do, and what I can't do in an application is defined by authorization. And if I talk about a real practical use case, so let's say that as a user of a blog site, I might be able to add my blogs, I might be able to access other blogs, I might be able to comment, but I might not be able to, delete someone else's comment, right? Because although I am a verified user of that platform, I should be only able to delete my blogs, right? So blogs that I have written and not the blog that someone else have written. So that is how authorization works. So I hope that the concept about authentication and authorization is clear to you all. Yep. So now let's go to the third part of the agenda. So we will now talk about OAuth. And just a quick hint that we will also be talking about different authorizations flow, and as I said, we will have some two demos, one with the Spotify auth and one with the GitHub auth, right? So that these are the agendas. So now let's talk about OAuth, and this is actually for the demo. So I'm going to skip this slide for now because we need to cover the technical concept first. But if you are looking for a demo, then please make sure that you have these installed on your machine. So you need to have a Postman account, a GitHub account, as well as Spotify account. So if you already have these three, then you're good to go. If not, please make sure you create one. We will have enough time to do this, so don't worry if you don't have this right now as well. So yeah, let's see everything in action. So OAuth, as I said, is an authorization framework, and it is something new, I would say, in terms of authentication authorization landscape, because uh, now nowadays it has become an industry standard, but earlier it was not. So uh, let's say you're trying to go to a web page of a restaurant application, right, or a food order application. So now you will be able to see a section where you will see these buttons like continue with Facebook, or sign up with Google, Apple, or even GitHub and LinkedIn, right? And you have the traditional authentication mechanism of email and password as well. So that is something we refer to as basic authentication. And OAuth allows you to, log into different application by using a third party uh, sites such as Facebook or Google. So what this will do is that it will take you to the Google's page, and it will ask if you allow this application like DoorDash to send some information back, like your account name, your profile picture, or your date of birth, and some other details. So we can define the scope of what actually we want the application to receive. So we will define the scope, and after we allow everything, we will get redirected back to application like DoorDash, and they will already have all of our details. So that way we can skip the traditional sign up process or the sign in process, and we get directly logged into the application. So that is how what works. So it's an authorization framework. And uh, here we don't use username and password, as I already said. So we will use something called token that we will see in the demo part of the video. So what happens behind the scene is that once you click on these buttons and uh, allow the application to access your Facebook profile and other data, or like some other third-party application like Google, Apple, or something like that. So these application will send the access token back to your application. So uh, that way you will be able to make API requests to this application, and that is how you get access to different sort of information about the platform. So yeah, that's how the flow works. Now let us try to see, the actual flow of how this happens and how different things glue together. So first we will have the client. It's the client. Please don't get confused with the user, because in this scenario, when we talk about OAuth, client is not actually the user, but the application that the user is trying to use. So let's say I have created a new food order application, so that will be the client for me. So first, what will happen is that there will be an authorization request to the resource owner. So that will be, let's say, John. So John is a user, and he's trying to use my food order application. So first, the food order application will make a request to John saying, "Hey, John, I want to access your Google accounts. Is that okay with you?" And John should reply with either yes or no to allow or deny the request. So if he allows the request, then he will get an authorization grant code of OK response. So now since the application got an OK response to get his Google contact, so the food order application will then now make another request to the authorization server. So in this case, we are taking example of Google's API. So since we want to access the Google account from Jones account, so what will now happen is that the food order application will make a request to Google's authorization server with this grant code, and he or she will ask for the access token to the authorization server. And if the authorization server verifies everything and makes sure that the user has actually granted the permission, so that is something what happens when we try to sign up with Google, and we click on allow, right? So we can click on allow, and we can also see what are the permissions that the app requires, like view your Google photos, or just your profile name or picture. So once we click on allow, that means the authorization is granted, and the application will now make a request to Google server, making sure that, hey, now I have this user's uh, consent, can I please get an access token? So authorization server will generate an access token and then send it back to the application. So authorization server now sends back the access token. So that means the client app, or in our case, the food delivery app, already has the access token, right? So once they have the access token, now they can use this access token as a replacement for users Google account username and password, right? Because we don't want to share our Facebook's identity or Google's identity or any other site's identity with some third party apps, right? Like the food delivery application, because we might not trust them. And actually giving our username and password is like a biggest threat to our privacy and security, right? So that is why we have used this concept of OAuth. So what this will allow is that instead of sending username and password, we are allowing the application to use our Google account, and that will and Google authorization server will verify everything and send our access token back. And the application can use this access token instead of my username and password to make API request and get all the information that it needs from my account. So in this case, the application wants to access my Google contact. So what it will do is that it will use this access token and it will ask the resource server. So in this case, it will be Google's contact server. So it will make a API call to the contact server and say, hey, I have this access token from this specific user, that is John in our case. So I have the access token from John, and they have authorized me to access their Google account. Can I please get it? And resource server will once again you verify the access token if it's correct or not, and if it's actually a valid access token, then they will send. Then the Google contact server will send back all the Google contacts. So that is how an authorization dance happens. So this is called a OAuth dance, and that's a name that developers have given to this flow. And we have different type of dance depending on what type of grant type do we use. We will see about the different grant type in the next slide and understand that in a bit detail. But I hope like these things is clear to you. So to recap everything that we have just said, so OAuth 2.0 is actually replacement for our username and password. So whenever we want to give certain permission to or access to our data to some applications like a food delivery app or an e-commerce site or any application that wants to access certain information from our uh, accounts like Google, Facebook, GitHub, or something like that. So what we do is that we allow them to get access to this information. So that will return a grant code of OK, and the application will send a request to the Google authorization server, and it will ask for the access token. And if everything is valid, they will send back the access token. And by using this application instead of username and password, the client can make request on my behalf. So I am actually the resource owner, or Zone is actually the resource owner. But since we are not providing our username and password, the client will assume this access token as the credential, and it will make request to the resource server. And resource server, since it will validate the access token, and if it's actually a valid one and it has the scope. So scope, I mentioned about in earlier slide. So scope will define what are the permissions that you have with that access token. So we can limit the scope of our access token to just say you can only get my public profile name and nothing else than that. So that is scope. That is how we define scope. Or we can say, hey, you not only have access to read my information, but you can also even modify my Google contact, or you can even add pictures to my Google Drive. So things like that. So that is how we define different privileges and permissions in the scope label. So once resource server verifies the scope, and it will send back all the resources. Yep. So I hope everything about the OAuth 2.0 dance is clear. So please make sure that if you have any questions, you can post them in the comments, and I would be more than happy to answer all your queries. And yeah, please make sure like you please feel absolutely free to ask any questions regarding this, and I will be more than happy to answer your questions. And please give us a thumbs up if you are understanding the concept that I'm trying to explain. So that is about OAuth 2.0. And now let's see the different grant type that we have. So the one we saw earlier, so as I mentioned here, it's the authorization code grant type, but we do have some other grant type like authorization code with Pixie, password, client credentials, and implicit. And we need to understand when to use which grant type, right? So if you have a server and a client architecture, let's say you have a mobile or a web app which is talking to a backend server, then the authorization code would be a good option for you, because in this case you can actually hide the client secret in the server, because whenever we make a request from the server, that is not visible to the public. while if we only use the front end or the client, then the secret will be leaked because we would be mostly using browsers and our application where we can't have our secrets. So in that case, if you just have the front app kind of thing, so let's say you just have a React application and that application is trying to use Google sign-in, right? So in that case, a better grant type would be authorization code with Pexi because that is better suited for single page apps where client secret cannot be hidden from public. We also have password, which is mostly just a plain password that we can use, but please only use this if you just have a first party application. So if your application is not accessed by anyone else and it just an internal services, so in that case, and password would be good because all of your services are first party, so you are not exposing that to the public or anyone else. So in that case, a password would be a good grant type. We also have client credentials. So if you just have servers and multiple servers and not any client, so we can enable the servers to talk to each other using this grant type. And since communication flow would be pretty smooth because there are only servers involved, so client can we don't need interference from client side. So that is about the client credentials. And we have an implicit grant type as well, but now that is a legacy one, and we prefer to use the authorization code with Pixie for front-end apps. But there used to be an implicit grant type option in the earlier version of OAuth. Please just remember that. So now we have covered the different type of grants that we can use for our OAuth application. Let's see everything in action. So sorry, that was a bummer. Let me quickly share my uh, slide and we can see what how we can incorporate the API. So first, to have a demo for the OAuth, let's get started by using the Spotify API first. And after that, once we complete the Spotify authentication, we will jump back to GitHub authentication and see uh, how we can do it in using GitHub. So let's get started. Let me close my slides and let me bring back Spotify. Awesome. I hope you can see my slides. And if you search for Spotify OAuth, this should be OAuth, then you will be greeted with this page, authorization. So please make sure that you go over there. And please make sure that you are also signed into Spotify account. So if you don't have a Spotify account, you can quickly create that from over here, and you should be able to get up and running in a minute. So I have already signed into the Spotify account, so I can see my name over here. And on the documentation, if you see that we have the author documentation about authorization and how Spotify implements the OAuth 2.0 framework. Just a second. So this is how it happens. So we have an end user, so that will be users like us, and we have any application that we want to use OAuth. So what happens is that we give the permission to our application to access our account, and the app will then make a request to the Spotify server, and if everything is okay, then the Spotify server will send back the information to our application. So that is how the flow works. So end user, means the Spotify user, so they grant access to the protected resources such as playlist or personal information, and the app, which is actually the client, will request access to these protected resources, and the server, after verifying everything, will provide the protected resources to the user. So that is the flow. And if you click on the different grant types, you can see that the Spotify OAuth supports 4 different kind of grant type. We talked about this earlier as well. It supports authorization code with Pixie, the client credentials, and implicit grant, but we will be going with the authorization code for this demo. And if you see on the authorization code flow, let me zoom this a bit. Mhm. I hope you can see the image over here. Awesome. I hope the picture is a bit clear. I'll explain this. So this is similar to the authorization code dance that we saw earlier as well. So what happens is that let's say we have an application, right? So I'm trying to build my own application, which tries to recommend different songs to users. So we are building a song recommender app. So assume that we have an application. So that will be our client in this case, and this entire block is the client. And we have the Spotify service over here. So that is actually the Spotify service that exposes different API, and we have the user over here. So what happens is that the application will make a request to the Spotify account service, and it will send all the different details such as the client ID, and that will contain information about who is the user that is trying to make a request. And it will also define the scope, like what are the permissions do the application needs, such as I want the application to access my playlist, or I want my application to also um, expose my favorite artist. So these are the things that will be defined in the scope, and it will prompt a user for login if they have not already. And once they are logged in, the user will be prompted to allow this permission. And once they authorize everything, it will be sent. They will now The application will now request the Spotify service to for the access token. And we also have a refresh token because uh, by using the access token, as I said, the application can assume our credential, and they don't need to use the username and password. But often with access token, they have an expiry limit. So let's say the application gets an access token for an hour or for 5 hours, but after 5 hours, it will expire. So in that case, they will need to again log into Spotify and again allow for the access. But that creates a hassle for the user, because if for every 1 hour they need to do this step of allowing the application to access their Spotify account again and again, that will be a bit troublesome for them. So that's why we have a refresh token. So let's say in about 4 hours and 59 minutes, so that is just a minute before the actual expiry, the application will make a request behind the scene to Spotify service using the refresh token, and they will get a new access token by default. So that is how uh, the application can automatically get new access token uh, again and again behind the scenes. So that is something we don't need to worry about. So refresh token allow you to get new access token that will be valid for 5 more hours. And again, after 4 hours and 59 minutes, it will again send a request to Spotify service. And that is how you can get the new access token again. So that is about the access token. And once you get the token back, so the application gets the access token, and now it can make any request to the Spotify web API and return any data that it wants. Let's say it wants to access some playlist account. So users now, it by using this access token, uh, they will be able to get the requested data. So, and I talked about the refresh token as well. So once it about stack bar, it will use the refresh token and it will return a new access token. So that is about the code flow. And the first thing that we need to do over here is to create our application. And for that, what you can do is click on the dashboard. And I have already created a sample application over here, but I will show everything from the beginning. So I'll create a new app. And for this new app, let's give it a name. So that will be MLS Global Hack Week Security Demo. So Global Hack Week Security Demo, just give it a description. Demo for OAuth 2.0. This website refers to actually the website of your application, but since we don't have a production level website ready over now that has a domain, I will just give a localhost website as the website. And this is mostly used when we are in development phase. And since this is for a demo, I will just mention it at localhost. You can do the same as well. But if you actually have a website that you want to use, you can click on the you can even actually type in the website with your real domain name. That is a good question, Rasmi. You can do it. You can follow along if you want to, follow along and see how things work in real time. But if you are watching this for the first time and just want to watch and relax, then that is totally fine as well. Because like for beginners, sometimes it can be overwhelming. But since we will have this recorded in our Twitch and YouTube channel, you can always rewatch this and do it and at your own pace. But please feel free to follow along if you have these accounts and everything in place. So that is all good as well. Thank you for the question. Awesome. So for now about the redirect URI. So this is something, this is the URL where the Spotify will redirect once we allow the application to get whatever the permission that we need. So uh, for now, since we will be using Postman, we can use the Postman redirect URI, but I will not edit it for now. I will just mention it at localhost and we will modify this later. Okay, so just remember that we need to change this later on. So for now, I'll click on save. And after this, what happens is that we will get with this details about the number of users who are trying to access our app. And we also get this all other details. but I want to go to settings and I need this two important piece of information. So first we will need the client ID, which is displayed over here, and we will also need the client secret. You can, these two information are crucial because we will need this to make request. And to have a demo, I have actually created the Postman workspace over here. So I will be sharing this workspace with you as well. Just a second. Just a second. I'll just make sure that this workspace is shared with you all and come back to you. Mhm. Let me quickly pull up the link. So here we go on the StreamYard. Here we go. So you can find all the link for the session in this document. So please make sure that you bookmark this document if you are follow along or if you want to do this on your own pace at a later time. So let me go over here. Let me quickly pull my Postman over here. Give me a second. Mhm. There you go. So I have my Postman account over here, and I've created a workspace named uh, Global Hack Week Security Week with you all. So if you go inside the workspace, you can see that we have a different collections over here. So let us first start with the Spotify OAuth demo collection. So make sure you click on them. And if you're trying to do this on your own Postman console, make sure that you just copy and paste everything that is there in the collection as well. And please don't like, you will not be able to run requests from this collection. So make sure you either make a fork by clicking on over here, or you can just copy and paste what we do over here. So let's go with the Spotify OAuth demo. And if you click on the search request, so we will be able to see this URL, right? So you might be wondering what this is. So for that, let's go to Spotify demo. Spotify API. So if you go to the Spotify API on Google, and you can see that we will get a documentation of how we can use different APIs. And let's say we want to search a different playlist, right? Or we want to search for a song. And if I click on reference and search for item, you can see that we have an endpoint over here. So that is api.spotify.com v1 slash, and we get this endpoint of slash search, and we have different query parameters. We also have a type filter. But to be able to do any of these and to use any of these reference API, since this is not a public API, you need to create you need to create an app, and make sure that the OAuth flow is set up. So that is what is given here as well in the getting started application. So we created our application. That part is already done, and then we got our client ID and client secret. So that part is done. So now we need to get the access token, right? So before we get started with making API request, we need to make sure that we have the access token, right? So let's go back to our Postman. And if you see over here, so the base, you can see that, just a second. Let me zoom out this a bit. You can see that on the collection level. So if you click on Spotify OAuth 2.0, so this is a collection, and under the collection we can have different requests. If you want to add a new request, you can go over there, and you can add some new request as well by clicking on add request. But we already have set up one request, and this base URL is nothing but a variable. So I can even delete this for now and actually use the real URL. Just a second. I will go to my references tab, and we will use the search reference. And this part of the endpoint is same for all the API requests. So if I show you, so even for artist, you can see that api.com/p1 is same, right? So we will make sure that we have that URL over here. So this is actually the base URL that it was referring earlier. So we will give it a full URL for now. And for sorts, we need to mention the endpoint as slots, and then we will provide different parameters like the query parameters or the string that we want to search. So I'm searching for anything that matches the word remaster, and I want it to be I want the list of artists over there, and I am limiting the number of responses to 3. So at maximum, I will get 3 responses, but you can change it as many as you want. So if everything matches, then we'll get a response. But now let us try to see what happens when we try to make this API request, right? Awesome. Just a second. Okay, cool. Just if I try to send this request, you can see that we get a response saying that no token was provided, right? So since we have not provided any access token, Postman cannot make request to this API because that is a private API, and we will need to authenticate ourselves in order to get this API. So for that, what we will do is that we will click on the Spotify OAuth 2.0 demo, and under over different tabs, you will be able to see the authorization tab over here. And if you click on authorization, you can see that we can select OAuth 2.0 as our authorization type, and it's already selected for me. But if it's anything different for you, make sure that you select the OAuth 2.0. And over here, we need to configure different things to make sure that we get the access token, because uh, we need that access token, and Postman will need that access token to make API request to Spotify, because those are the private endpoints and it's not available publicly. And now in order to get the access token, we need to configure certain things. So the first name would be to specify a token name. You can specify it as anything, but I have given it a token name of Spotify. And for the grant type, we are using the authorization code grant type and not anything else, as we discussed already and saw it in the slides as well. So make sure that the grant type is authorization code. And for the auth URL, so this is actually the auth URL, and I have mentioned that in the docs as well. So if you go over here to the documentation that I have shared with you all, you can see that we have defined the auth URL as well as the access token URL. So that is the same thing that we are doing over here. If you're wondering how I got this, so it's available on the documentation part itself. So if you go over here and click on uh, getting started, you can see that uh, you will be able to see different URLs to get your API, right? So you can see that this is the API endpoint. We can also get the authorization endpoint. So that is how I got the different endpoint. And if you debug over here, you will be able to see all the different sort of endpoint and callback URL, right? So that was about the token endpoint and the authentication endpoint. So make sure that you uh, ensure that auth URL as well as access token URL is set up over here. So I have mentioned the auth URL as well as the access token URL. And for the client ID, we need to provide it a client ID and a client secrets. You can add this in form of variable if you don't want, if you want to share this with other people and you want them to not see your client ID and client secret, you can use them as variable. But for now, yeah, and in order to use variable in Postman, you can use double curly braces and the variable name, and you will define this variable inside the variable tab. So if I paste the value over here, so that will be pre-filled over here. And so let's go ahead and do that. So let me copy my client ID and client secret. So I'll go over to my dashboard, and for the MLS security demo, let me go over there. And from the settings tab, I can see the client ID and client secret, right? So I will copy them. So this will be my client ID. I'll paste it over here in the current value tab, and same goes for the client secret. I'll paste it over here in the current value tab. So I have now inserted my client ID in client. Make sure you press Control S or Command F if you are on a Mac to save these secrets. And now if I go to my overview and authorization, I have set up my client ID and client secret. We don't need to use scope for this demo, Spotify, but we will see about scope in the GitHub demo as well. So we'll leave everything as default. And now let us try to get new access token. So yeah, now you can see that we got an error of invalid redirect URI, right? Because we said that we would set the callback URL, but we did not actually change it. So we need to do that. Let me go ahead and edit this. And for the redirect URI, I will make sure that I will remove the localhost and I will add the callback URL from Postman. So just copy the default callback URL, because we want the application to redirect the user to Postman itself, right? After they have provided the access. So that is why we will set the redirect URI. I will save this. Uh, I'll give it a port of 3000 for now, just because it wants to see a valid website. Awesome. So that is now done. And now if I try to make a request and click on get access token, just a second. I think it's not saved. Just a second. Call back URI. Mhm. Let me try to figure out what's happening. Awesome. So redirect URI is still localhost, and I don't know why. I think we saved it, right? So let us add this one and let us try to save this again. I guess now, yeah, now you can see that the redirect URI is set to Postman, so this should work. So I will try to generate a new access token again. Yeah, now you can see that the OAuth flow is set up correctly. And since I'm already logged into my account, you can see that my information over here. But if you are doing this for the first time and have not logged into Spotify, it will ask you to log into Spotify first. And I will click on agree because I have just set up everything. And now you click on proceed, you should be able to see the access token over here, right? So what happened behind the scene? Let us try to recap what has happened behind the scene and understand how this all worked. So what happened is that our application made a request. Our application first prompted us to, allow Spotify to, send the data to this Postman URL. And since we clicked on allowed, what happened is that it talked with the authorization server of Spotify, and then the Spotify authorization server verified everything. And since the request was a valid one, so it sent back the access token to Postman. And now by using this access token, we can make any API request defined on the documentation. So that will act as our credential. And you can see that it expires in 3600 seconds. So this token is valid for 60 minutes. And we have a refresh token, and this will be used to generate a new access token when the old access token is about to expire. So that is how uh, we got the token, and you can see all the different timestamp and client secret and everything over here. So I'll click on use this token. So now the token is added. So since the token is now added, I should be able to use this token in my request. So now if I go to my request that we tried to see earlier and click on send, here you go. Now we get a response back, right? So you can see that the authorization code workflow is all set up, and I got a list of the artist because I wanted to get a list of artists, right? Because I used the search endpoint and I provided different parameters like the remaster query, and I typed in the artist as the result that I want to get, and I set the limit to 3. So here are the list of 3 artists, and you can see that I can even open the different albums, I would say. So let me try to do that quickly. So if I click over here, you can see that I got this artist over here as remastered, and you can see different tracks over here. Likewise, if I want to get the artist from second one, just a second, from the second one. So this is a remaster, the another artist remaster, and you can see all the popular tracks over here. So you can see that our API is working fine, and we have successfully authenticated using OAuth flow for Spotify. So that is all set. Now we have covered the first part of the workflow. Now let us try to see how we can do this with GitHub. And for this demo, we will be using the Node.js version of the application. It's a both front-end and back-end application. We will use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for the front-end and Node.js for the back-end. And we will see how we can use GitHub OAuth to set everything up. So we got everything covered for the Spotify OAuth demo. Now it's time for the GitHub OAuth demo. So let me close the Spotify one, and I will open the VS Code and everything. Just a second. Just a second. Mhm. Let me quickly pull back my. Here we go. So now we are in the. Um, Now we are in my VS Code window. So I will open my terminal as well. Give me a second. Here we go. And if you can see, this is a basic GitHub example, and I will share the GitHub link with you as well. It's actually an open source project, and it's a really cool one I found on GitHub. So I'll share the link with you all as well. Just give me a second. I will share this GitHub link with you all if you want to clone and work with me simultaneously. Give me a second. In the meantime, like please feel free to ask any question if you have any doubts or queries. Awesome. So let me quickly share this with you all. Here you go. So this is actually the GitHub repo where I cloned this code. So let me show you that as well. So this is actually the repo that I used for this demo, and it contains all the code for the application. So if you are doing this for the first time, make sure that you clone this repo first. So you can do that by copying this clone command by on. If you click on code, then you will be able to see the link for the repo, and if you just type the command git clone and the URL, then you will be able to get a copy of this repo. But since I've already cloned one, I don't need to do that. But if you're doing this for the first time, make sure that you type in the command first. Okay, let me clear that up. And now if we look at the demo, like the folder structure and the project as well. So we have a Node.js application, and for the static side, we have an index.html page. So this is a just a home page where we will get the button to sign in with GitHub. So what we are trying to do with this demo is that we are trying to sign in to our application using GitHub, right? So we want our application to access certain information from GitHub, and we will authenticate our user with the help of GitHub. So that way, the users don't need to use the username and password to sign up, and can use GitHub as an identity provider itself. So that is all that we do. We have HTML page, and then we have this section of content unauthorized and authorized one. So this is the content that the unauthorized user or someone who has not logged in will see, while if someone has logged in and if they are properly if they have the access credential, then they will be able to see this content. So the unauthorized user will see the sign in with GitHub button, while the authorized user will see awesome, you are authorized text. So that is all about the front end side of things. And for the backend, we are using Node.js. So if you don't understand the code, that is completely fine with us. We are using a backend framework called Express. So we are defining a home route that will render the front end of our application that we just saw, the index.html page. So if you just type in localhost 3000, it will just display the HTML page. So that is happening over here. And we have three different routes. So first one is the authentication route, and this is actually the GitHub authentication URL. And I will talk about this in just a second. We can skip that for now. Just the thing that I want you to remember is that the application will run on port 3000 because that is what we have set over here. And if you have Node.js installed on your machine, but that is because if you are trying to do this locally, you need to have Node.js installed. And you can check that after installing if it's installed. You can check that by using node-v. And since Node is installed, you can see the version over here. And once if that is done, you can click on npm install to install all the dependencies. Uh, just a second, I need to go inside the OAuth folder itself. Clear. And you can install the package by typing in npm install, and this will install the dependencies for you. I have already installed the dependencies, so I can see the node modules folder over here. So that is all done. Just a second. Sometimes you might see some error while you're trying to resolve these dependencies because there might be some permissions error. So I have faced this one, but you can just make sure you can type this command to resolve that. So if you see some error like this, so let me just highlight that on the stream itself. So sometimes what we get is that when we are trying to install this dependency, it will ask you to change your permission. So if you are on a Mac or a Linux, so you can use this command, and it will be displayed on the log console log itself over here. So the users will be different for you. So that was my username, but it will be for your username of the PC, and you should be able to resolve that issue. So once we are done, we can start the server using nodemon. So that is the start script, and I'll give it the start script. So that will be index.js. And now you can see the application is listing on port 3000. So if I pull up my browser over here and go to localhost 3000, you can see that I am greeted with this page over here, and it says that I need to sign in with GitHub, right? Okay, so this is all set, but now let's try to see how the OAuth flow works in GitHub. So if you search for GitHub OAuth, so if you just excuse me, pardon me for that. So give me a second. Okay, so now for the GitHub OAuth, if you click on the authorization OAuth page, you can see that how the authorization flow works, right? So it's pretty similar to the Spotify OAuth flow that we just saw. So first, the users are redirected to request GitHub identity. So from our application like this, when we click on sign in with GitHub, it will redirect to the GitHub portal, and there they need to either sign in, or if they are already logged in, then they need to allow access to this our API, right, to our application. And once the access is granted, users are redirected back to our application site by GitHub, and we will also get an access token in return. And once we get this access token, we can do different things. So this is the URL for getting users identity. So that was github.com/login/OAuth/authorize, and we can specify different parameters. So we will need different parameters. Firstly, the client ID, and we can get the client ID from GitHub apps that I will show you in a second. We can specify the URI, and we can also define the scope. So we talked about scope, right? So scope will define what permissions GitHub will provide to our application. So if you click on list of scopes, you can see like the different scopes that we have. So if you give it a scope of repo, then the application would be able to do anything with your repo, like full access to your public and private repo. But we don't want that. What we will do for this demo is that we will go to the user's scope, and we will just give it a read user scope, and that means that the application would be able to access our profile information. So it will be able to access our information like username, email, our avatar, the avatar images that we use in GitHub, and all those things. So we just want that information, but only a read access and not a write access. So we will use this scope. So please remember that in mind. So before we get started with the understanding code and how this all works, uh, we need to create a GitHub application first. So for that, what we need to do is that we need to go to our GitHub account settings. So I'm now in my GitHub dashboard. So over here, if you click on settings, right? So if you go to settings, so and if you scroll down a bit, you will be able to see the developer settings over here, right? So on the bottom left corner of the panel, you should be able to see the developer settings. And here you need to select the OAuth apps. And here you can create a new application. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll create a new OAuth application, and I will give it a name. So that will be GSW security demo, but you feel free to give any name that you want. And for the homepage URL, since we are running this app locally on port 3000, so that will be my application. So you can see that the application is running on port 3000, and this is just a local host. So I'll give that. You can see that the application is running on local host 3000. So I'll just copy this and paste it over here. So this will be my homepage URL. But once you publish your website, so you should enter your full domain name over here. So description is optional. I will leave it over here. And for the callback, if you see in our application code base, we actually have a callback endpoint over here. So we will use that endpoint instead. So we will use this endpoint as our callback URL. In Postman, we use the Postman callback URL that Postman generated by default. But for this one, since we have our own application server, we will use the application server callback URL. So that would be, I'll copy the prefix over here. So this is actually the callback URL. So localhost 3000 is our home page, and /OAuth /callback is our callback URL. And now I can click on register application. So once I register my application, I will be able to see a client ID as well as a client secret. So I can click on generate a new client secret. And for that, you might need to provide your password. So I'll just quickly do that. I'll provide my password, and here you can see that I can see my client secret. And please make sure that you copy this and paste it in a safe space, because you will only be able to see client secret once. So once you generate a client secret and close this tab and come back to the second, you won't be able to see a client secret. So in that case, you would need to generate a new client secret. So if you want to make sure that you access this for a long time, make sure that you copy it somewhere else. Okay. So what I will do is that we need to go back to our application, and under the .env.sample, so you will be able to see this file once you clone the repo. And after that, you need to create a .env file. So this is a sample file for you all, but actually we need a file called .env, because that is where we will store our credentials of GitHub client ID and client secret, because we don't want our GitHub client ID and client secret as a part of application code, because if you share your application repo with someone else, then they will also be able to see it, right? So we don't want that. And that is why we are using this as an environment variable, because if you use them as an environment variable, even if you share your code, no one else will be able to figure it out, right? Because we don't push the environment variable into our GitHub repo. So if you see on the index.js page, you can see that we are all referencing the client ID and client secret as the environment variable and not hard coding it in our code base. So that is how we need to store our credentials. So let's go ahead and do that. I've actually pasted in some old client ID and client secret, so I'll just remove them. And for the GitHub client ID uh, secret, let's go ahead and do that. I'll copy the client ID from here, copy it and paste it over here. Likewise, I will copy the client secret, which is from here, and I will paste it over here. So now that I have pasted in my client ID and client secret, make sure that the value is separated by equal to sign. So GitHub client ID equals to your value, and GitHub client secret equals to some other value. So once you have set this up on your .env file, what you can do is to run your application again. So if you are using nodemon, so your application should get restarted, but nonetheless, let's close the application and restart it again using nodemon index.js. And now if I go back to my homepage and refresh this, I should be able to see this button, sign in with GitHub, and I'll click over there. And here you can see that it's asking me to authorize the MLR.js security demo, right? Give me a second, I'll just grab my water. Thank you for your patience. Uh, so this was the app that we just created, right? So now this app that we have locally is trying to access our GitHub information, right? Profile information. And you can see that it wants to access my account, and it is asking for personal user data because we set the scope to uh, read user data, right? So now if let us try to understand why it is requesting our personal data, right? So if you go to the code base, and if you can see that once the user clicks on the let us see how this all works. Once the user click on the sign in with GitHub button, it is being redirected to the /auth URL, right? And now if you go to the /auth URL, so this is actually the /auth endpoint. So it is redirecting to the GitHub authentication and authorization URI, right? So this was actually the GitHub OAuth URI. So how do we get this? You can see it from the auth page over here. You can see that the URI is over uh, github.com/login/auth/authorize, and it is exactly the same over here, /login/auth/authorize. And we are providing the client ID from the environment variable, right? So this is actually the environment variable where we are providing the client ID, and it is reading the client ID from there, and we are setting the scope to just read the user's profile information, right? So we saw the scope from here. So from here, we are setting the read user scope, right? So that is how we are providing all of this information. And once we click on allow, so now if you go back over here, and after if I click on authorize Sagar Upreti, you can see that it will redirect to localhost 3000, right? Because that was the callback URL, and it will then hit this endpoint of OAuth/callback, and that will then perform all the other action that we want. So let's try to see what happens. So authorize Sagar, and you can see that I am now authorized, right? And I can see some token information in my URL added over here. So if you see my uh, URL, you can see that we have got some token information over here, right? So let us see what is happening behind the scene and how we are getting this token information. So this is actually the access token that we are talking about. So we talked about access token a lot in this session, right? So, and this is actually the access token that GitHub has sent back to the application, and we can use this access token to get anything that we want, especially the user's data, right? So let us see how we are getting this token behind the scene. So what happens is that since we have, if you go to the GitHub application, uh, you can see that the callback URL is localhost 3000 slash OAuth slash callback, right? So once we click on authorize, this endpoint is being called, right? And if you see what's happening in that endpoint, so we are destructuring the response from GitHub and we are extracting the code object and we are setting a new body object with the client ID, client secret. So we are getting the client ID and client secret from our environment variables that we have set up over here. And then we are also using the code object that we get as a response after we authenticate to GitHub. And we are placing a new header. So in our header, which we define as a type of application slash JSON. Now, and then what we are doing is that we are making an API call to the GitHub access token URI, and we are sending also the body. So body will contain GitHub client ID, client secret, and the code object, as well as the authorization header. And whatever response that we are getting, we are restructuring that response to get our access token, right? So this is actually the response body, and from the response body, we are getting the access token, and then we are outputting that in our Node.js console as well as redirecting the users to the slash token URI. And this is how we saw that token, right? So if you go to the browser and see over here, we saw the endpoint as slash token and we got the token itself, right? So this is how we are getting that, because we are redirecting the user to slash token endpoint and displaying the token over here. And if we are getting an error, then we are just displaying the error, but that is not the case in our scenario. Let's try to see in the console itself. And in the console, you can see we also get the access token because we are uh, just a second because we are also outputting that in our console, right? So now this is the access token that we receive. So the entire OAuth flow is solved. So now we can use this access token to get any user's information. So let us try to do that. So let's go not to our Spotify one, pardon me for that, to our GitHub endpoint. So now we have that access token. Even I can, inspect this page and open my developer console. And even here, if you go on a network tab, and if I now try to refresh this page, you can see that we are having a token object, right? So token as our string parameter over here, and you can see the token from here as well, right? So now if I try to, even clear this token and just hit localhost 3000, and now if I try to click on sign in with GitHub button, I am not being redirected back to GitHub and it is not asking me to authorize, right? Because I have already authorized it once and the expiry was set to 3600 seconds, right? So the expiry of the access token was around 1 hour. So that is why the browser is automatically adding the token to our request, and I am already authorized. So that is how we can have our users not log in again and again and use that access token instead. And after about 59 minutes, we can use the refresh token to get a new token for our user. So that is how the access token works. And we can see that in the network tab as well. But now, since we have our access token, let's see how we can use the access token to get some users data. So let me go to Google and type in get GitHub username. And I want to get username of the user from API. So I can go to the documentation over here. And if you go to the documentation, then you should be able to see, the docs over here. I'll just make sure that I paste it on GitHub, the stream access. Yeah, so now you're on the stream, and this is actually the API for the users. So we can use this API to get public and private information about our authenticated user. So we have done this part, right? We have properly authenticated our user with GitHub, right? And we have set the scope to be able to read our user profile data, right? So we have done all of that. So we have completed the authentication part. So now we can just call this endpoint and get the user details. So let me do that. So I want to get the information about the authenticated user. So I will make sure that I can use either the JavaScript, or if you're using GitHub CLI, you can do that. But I'll just do the basic call from my terminal itself to make this request. So I'll just copy in this command. So it's actually API request command. So what we can do is that We can even, copy all of this. Okay, so I will copy all of that and I will go back to my VS Code, right? I will open up a new terminal and I will paste in this command, right? So this will actually make an API request to the GitHub server, but the thing that we need to pass is the token over here. So I will insert my token over here that we got in response. So from my other terminal, you can see that this is my token, right? So this is actually my token that is valid for 1 hour. So I'll paste it over here. So I have pasted the token. Awesome. And now let us try to see if we get our details. Here you go. So you can see that I am getting a list of response about my profile information. So you can see that my username is Sagar Supreti. You can see my avatar URL also. If you click on it, you should be able to see my avatar over here. So here you go. So you can see that I can even get my GitHub username profile. Likewise, I can get my uh, the username, the GitHub profile username. You can get my follower details. You can see, everything. You can see the part of organization that I am, public information such as my Twitter ID and all those things. So you can get all the details of my user, right? So this is how we successfully authenticated our application to use OAuth 2.0 and get access to our GitHub profile information. So I guess that brings us like and closing, it's ending towards the end of our session. So let me quickly recap what we did in the first and the second demo before we complete our slides. Okay. So in the first demo, what we did is to authenticate our Postman client with Spotify to access some of the Spotify API, such as to get artist information. So even for that, we need to authorize our um, Postman client with our Spotify account. So for that, we use the Postman and we made sure that we set up proper authorization flow, and then we got the information back, right? And for the second demo for using GitHub OAuth, we have this repo over here, which is from open source, and we use this repo to set up our application, and then we set up our client ID and client secret by creating a GitHub application in our developer settings. And then after we have this, uh, we understood how the callback and everything worked. We also set up the callback URL in our GitHub application. If you go back to the GitHub applications, you can see that we set up our callback URL. So this needs to match the URL in our code base. So exactly the same OAuth dash callback. And after that, uh, we defined a scope of read user. So if you see over here, we for the auth/auth endpoint, we defined the scope as read user. We provided it with client ID that indeed returns to this callback. And by using the response from this callback, as well as defining different headers such as client ID, client secret, and the code, we got the access token. And finally, we are redirecting the user to this URL with access token and also outputting that in our terminal. So uh, we have used this token uh, into our GitHub API. So we have the user's API over here, and we are using the call request, and we are replacing this token with our actual token, and that is how we can get our information. So I'll be deleting the application in just a while because I don't want anyone to use my client ID and client secret. So please make sure that you create a new one and use yours instead. So that is everything for the demo. I hope you liked it. Now let me go back to my slides over here, and there you go. So thank you everyone for attending this demo, and I am really sure that you learned about OAuth and how we can use OAuth in different use cases and scenario. We talked about different type of authorization code and grant type as well. And I'm pretty sure like you will have some information by the end of this demo. Sure, I will share the slide as well with you all in the global hack week security launch over there. So I will be sharing all the slides over there. But if you want it now, I can give it to you now as well. Just a second, I will do that. Let me share this with you all. Anyone with the link should be able to view this. Copy link, done. Awesome. So here you go. So you can find the slides from this link as well. So thank you everyone once again for joining in. And I'm really sure that you learned. If you have any questions, then I would be able to answer it now, please. So let me remove this from the stream. I'll add some background music as well. Awesome. So I hope you really like this session. So if you have any questions, then I'm here to answer it. Else, we are good to go. Thank you, Rasmi. Thank you. Thank you. And I am really glad that you liked the session. I guess it's pretty hot out here, so I need to head back now. So thank you, folks, for joining in. And if you have any questions, please feel free to tag me on my socials or on the Global Hack Week security links. Until next time, this is your friendly MLS coach, Sagar, signing off. Bye bye.